Welcome, Mendoza. How you guys doing? We are truly thankful for your presence here today. This is a great opportunity during our Solidarity Summit to hear from one of the leaders of the first and the oldest Black intercollegiate fraternity in the country, Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. We have our guest here, Dr. Willis Lonzer. And this fireside chat took a little while to get going, but we're finally here. Dean Crimmers is going to be a great interviewer here this afternoon. And we just thank you once again for spending some time with us. And at this point, let me turn it over to Dean Crimmers.
So, thank you, Martin. Also, especially appreciative of all of your efforts. It was Martin Johnson who first really took the initiative to establish our first partnership with Alpha Phi Alpha, for which we're so grateful and so appreciative. So good afternoon. Welcome to Mendoza on this beautiful fall day. So I'm Martin Crimmers. I serve as Dean of the College of Business, and I'm hosting this fireside chat without fireside. With our various esteemed guests. We're so honored that you're joining us, Dr. Willis Lonzer III. So Dr. Lonzer, I'm going to have a brief bio, is the General President of the Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity, the first intercollegiate Greek-lettered fraternity for African-American men, which has a very long and very interesting history that we'll hear more about during our conversation today. So Dr. Lonzer is the regional medical director at Horizon Therapeutic in the greater Chicago area. He has more than 20 years of experience in global medical affairs and pharmaceutical research and development. He earned his Bachelor of Science in Chemistry from Delaware State University and his doctorate in biochemistry from the University of Akron. Dr. Lonzer has served as the General President of the National Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity since 2021 and is a member of the National Pan-Hellenic Council. Dr. Lonzer has a great deal of experience, insight, and expertise in leadership and community service, as well as the challenges of leading service organizations. We're so grateful for the fraternity's ongoing partnership with us in developing young leaders, which has included hosting programs such as the Inclusive Leadership Immersion from 2021, last year, and the current ongoing Solidarity Summit taking place right now at Mendoza. So since we started our partnership about a year ago, we're so grateful that we now have enrolled 5 Alpha men in our graduate programs, 2 in our full-time MBA and 3 in our specialized master's programs. So please join me in giving a warm Notre Dame welcome to Dr. Lonzer. So my first question is for all of us to hear more about you and your background. So you're a medical professional and general president of Alpha Phi Alpha, but also a business person. So can you tell us about your professional journey and all those different hats?
Well, first, I want to thank the Notre Dame family for the invitation to come and have this fireside, non-fireside chat. We live in the metaverse now, so there is really a fire here. We just don't see it. Interestingly, my interest in journey began, as many academicians do, on a campus in a research lab and understanding molecular medicine and seeing the advent of the increase in technologies and that would lead to better cures and better opportunities to treat patients. And interestingly, in my path, I departed from clinical medicine and saw some of my areas, I'll call them God-given abilities in mathematics and physics and biophysics and biochemistry that led me to become an NIH fellow in physiology and biophysics, and was at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine for a period of time. But long story short, that need and that draw away and towards more molecular medicine drove my interests in how to better develop, once you've discovered an asset, and help it get to patients faster. Many of you have heard of the bed to bench side connection. And that I was a part of that, I guess, advent of that. I'm telling my age a little bit. It's a little daunting when you think about it, but long story short, that heightened my interest, and it was really about 20, almost 25 years ago that some medicines came to be available that were too intricate for physicians to understand. And they brought many of us who were researchers, and I'm saying standard clinicians, though, who were academics and who were researchers, to come to industry and help to not only develop better materials for patients to understand, but better even guidance and educational materials for physicians who treat patients with very intricate and very complex medications. It has taken me from being a medical scientist person to becoming scientific director for global, for AbbVie. And now, while the title is regional, it's actually very vast in terms of the responsibilities, but helping children who have autosomal recessive disorders, X-linked disorders, immune deficiencies, and challenges like that, but applying a business mind and a business model, because we have to not only make sure that it's compliant within the regulatory component, but we are also sitting amongst what we call a matrix environment, where we have business partners and we sit across the table and look at from the medical side, does this make sense? Does it make sense from a regulatory side, et cetera? So it's been quite educational for me. I'm not the person I was when I began the journey. And now I take those skill sets and bring them to nonprofits like Alpha Phi Alpha, who it's a multi-million-dollar corporation, 116 years. And there are not a lot of companies that exist that long. And we are based in Baltimore, but with the advent of technology and planes, we make it work. So now I apply that and try to teach really pharmaceutical business models to our constituents within Alpha Phi Alpha, because we know how to get it done in pharma. And that's where we are today.
Thank you. So 116 years. Right?
Yes.
Alpha Phi Alpha.
December 4th of this year will be 116.
Yeah, I founded at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, for the first intercollegiate fraternity established for African American men.
Really for the world. We don't say that, but it's for the world. There were no Greek letter organizations outside of the United States, but it really is the world, only trumped by one other professional fraternity called Sigma Pi Phi, but that they weren't collegiate students, and then Freemasonry, which I am a Freemason as well.
So who started the Alpha Phi Alpha organization, and can you share more about the purpose?
Well, Dean Grimazai, I'm so glad you asked. This is the pride of any fraternity, to talk about its founders. 7 really unique men emerged out of a group of African Americans who were at Cornell University around the turn of the 20th century, where they were experiencing, quite frankly, social and educational prejudices. They needed to unite. They needed to try to find common ground so that they could survive the academic environment at Cornell and go on to be successful. Some were pursuing their initial degree. Some came for graduate work and were a part of the mixture. But in short, there were 7 men that founded Alpha Phi Alpha at Cornell University, and we deemed them the jewels of the fraternity. Henry Arthur Callis, who later became a physician, trained at Rush College of Medicine in Chicago. We also had Charles Henry Chapman, who was the oldest of the seven, who already had a business, but came there and later became a professor of agriculture at Florida A&M University. We have, let's see, I never break them apart. I always just rattle off the name. Eugene Kinkle Jones, who was the last recognized founder. I'm taking them in alphabetical order, but he actually had pursued a degree and came to Cornell for a master's degree and later became the first executive secretary, which is now known as the president of the Urban League here in the
Yes.
United States.
Wow.
George Biddle Kelly, the first professional civil engineer in the state of New York. And let's see, Robert Harold Ogle was of professional services, and which we see now, and he was actually married while he was a student at Cornell and had daughters, became one of the professional staffers in the United States Senate, much like the people you see working behind the scenes and making the Senate run. So he had that experience. And we had Nathaniel Allison Murray, who was an educator and a native of Washington, D.C., and later came to his forbearance as an educator there in the Washington, D.C. area. And we had Vertner Woodson Tandy, who was the first registered architect in the state of New York and the first commissioned Black officer in the New York, well, they called it militia at the time, but we call it the National Guard, but he was the first commissioned officer. So these seven distinguished men, I don't think I've left anyone out, brothers, you know,
No,
55.
I kept track. Seven.
They set a path that, and we would say grew exponentially. When we look at the founding of 1906, by the year 1920, we already had moved through the entire Greek alphabet to Alpha Alpha chapter, which is seated at the University of Cincinnati. It had grown from that nucleus in Ithaca to, I can take you to Howard University, into, which is Washington, D.C., to Richmond, Virginia, which was Gamma chapter, but the Delta chapter was seated at the University of Toronto for a period of time. So we were international even then. And then Epsilon was at the University of Michigan. Zeta is at Yale University. Eta is at Columbia University. Theta is at the University of Chicago. Iota was initially at Syracuse University, now in Atlanta. Mu is at the University of Minnesota. Nu is at Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Omicron was at University of Pittsburgh. Rho is seated at Temple initially, but now is a city chapter in Philadelphia. Sigma was the Boston, greater Boston area chapter. That's where Martin Luther King Jr. became a member of Alpha Phi Alpha when he was pursuing his doctorate. He graduated at 16 from Morehouse, so he was well within the age. Tau chapter is seated at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign.
Anyone else very impressed by this encyclopedic knowledge?
Upsilon,
Incredible.
Upsilon at the University of Kansas, and let's see, so let's see, Rose Sigma Tau Upsilon Phi. Phi is at Ohio State University. Pi, I left out Pi. It was at Cleveland, Case Western Reserve, Cleveland State University. Let's see, and Psi is at UPenn, at the University of Pennsylvania. We don't have an Omega chapters for those who pass away. So, but that's where we are. So we've had our feet at several Ivy League institutions, as well as throughout the expanse of the United States. But as you can see, we grew quite well within 6 years, 14 years rather.
Yeah. No, thank you. So back to 2022.
Sure.
Right? So can you share about your fraternity's mission today? How relevant is it right now, and especially for upcoming leaders such as our students?
Alpha Phi Alpha's mission is to develop leaders. We promote brotherhood and academic excellence. while very carefully and very intentionally providing service and advocacy for our communities where we are located. That mission statement was predicated upon the aims of our fraternity from its inception, which are manly deeds, very nice turn of the 20th century term, manly deeds, scholarship, and our love for all mankind. And it's underscored by our fraternity's motto that we are first of all, servants of all, we shall transcend all.
Thank you. So Mendoza, as part of Notre Dame, we're very committed to deepening our efforts to be a more inclusive and a more diverse and more equitable community. How would you describe the business culture today, more broadly, in terms of how important diversity, equity, and inclusion are?
Well, we are very much even as a fraternity of men and being inclusive and diverse in what we support. We have been interracial since 1945. And that integration took place at the University of Chicago's Theta chapter. Our second actual Caucasian brother was initiated at Upsilon chapter at the University of Kansas. Both of them, Martin, went on to, one became a dentist, the other became a physician. And the second brother, who died only maybe about 5 years ago, actually took his medical mission onto the continent of Africa and founded hospitals. What it told us and continues to tell us is we've seen an increase in our diversity within our ranks, that we are a global fraternity. We have probably, one would not imagine, our most diverse collegiate chapter is seated at Wichita State University. And they have not only African Americans, but Asian Americans, brothers of Korean descent, brothers of Asian Indian descent, as well as those who are from the mother continent in Africa, who come from Ghana and other areas. And we have now in our expansion recently chartered chapters in the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Accra, Ghana. We have a chapter in London. We have and one in Dubai. And we actually are poised to consider some others. I'm smiling as we make those considerations, but we are definitely about expansion. I'll say we have over 850 chapters globally, and we touch North America, Europe, Africa, and Asia.
So turning to business education,
yes.
What we're trying to achieve here at a business school like Mendoza, how do you see the role of business education and schools like ours in helping to build a more diverse and inclusive society?
I'm so glad you asked the question, because this is coming from a global corporate leadership perspective. That's one of the things that I campaigned on to become the general president, was to help broaden the scope of how Alpha Phi Alpha can play a role in that leadership development component. We recognize that we have a bully pulpit, a voice within the community that touches many. But what we need to do is empower young leaders as they're coming through to understand where the needs are in society. Being able to take your skill set, if you're a scientist, if you are trained perhaps as a social worker, but realize that the degree itself is not an end all to your existence, but it's a tool that can empower you. If you ever meet an Alpha Phi Alpha man, and that we are a men fraternity of men, you will find that we are typically very articulate, very sharp, in terms of our ability to recognize and navigate the room. We are engaging. We bring other components to the table and bring leadership to the table, but a spirit of cooperation as well. We want to see folks partner and do things together. And but that's how we shape you as you become a member to embrace the culture. Back to your question, we're building conduits within our organization for mentorship along the lines of STEM for those who are seeking business and economics, and for those who are seeking social sciences, for those who are even seeking a path through arts and sciences and arts and performing arts, so that we can ensure that those members who touch our organization understand that there is a value added proposition with being a part of our organization, and there's a, I'll call it a commitment to give back once you make it to where you go.
Great. So we were, again, so proud and honored that we have an ongoing partnership with Alpha Phi Alpha. From your perspective, how do you think about the partnership between Notre Dame and Alpha Phi Alpha?
Well, I was very delighted to hear that we were able to find common ground and establish a partnership. I recognize, well, first of all, hats off to the Fighting Irish. I watch you play teams I like. And even sometimes they go well and sometimes they don't go so well and you win. But I'm not saying I'm anti Notre Dame, not at all. I enjoy it, but I also recognize that this being a Catholic university, I didn't think that there really was a cultural connection. This was a nice opportunity for us to be ambassadors, to extend an olive branch of commonality, to find that there are organizations that you may not traditionally partner with that could be a great opportunity to see that folks of different cultures are often seeking similar things that Notre Dame is by mission. So we touch multiple institutions. We are seated at some of the most premier institutions, not only in this nation, but in the world. So if we can exist there, then we can find a way to partner with Notre Dame, even though we may not be seated as a chapter here, but we can be community partners at minimum.
No, thank you. As a Catholic university, we are also very interested in attracting a very broad, very diverse set of students, faculty, and staff. Especially when it comes to business, our mission is also very, I like to say Catholic with a small c, right? Universal, based on universal human principles, where I think there's a lot of common ground. So as the leader of a large nonprofit, and also as a business executive of a global medical health firm, what is your advice for our business students about their professional careers?
Well, my best advice is to try not to give advice, but more or less to try to listen. I think that if anything, being a person straddling both professionally the for-profit global market and having a leg into the nonprofit arena, is that we have to find ways to work in concert with each other. Often we think things have to be in conflict. They do not. There are many things, even physiologically, that work in concert that would never mix, but one cannot exist without the other. And I think that as we continue even to struggle as a nation around diversity of ideas and mindsets and perspectives, conservatives, liberals, you name it, there is a way for us to still coexist without annihilation. And my best advice to those who are coming in to the real world or standing on the precipice about to jump off the cliff, think about what your interests are. It's not about making money. Money will not make you happy. And I think probably many of us know that. But what we want is a satisfactory lifestyle in the sense of where you can get some completion in the things that you do. So try to find and follow your heart and where your passion is. Science and patience led me this way. And to make sure that when patients take a medication, it's been the science and the ethics are there along with the efficacy, and hopes for a cure or at least a treatment to manage through as we search for a cure. Those are the things that have driven me personally. And I encourage not to have only one mentor, but have maybe 3 formal mentors, but many informal mentors. Talk to people from different lines of business and in the world and different career paths so that you can apply the things maybe that they do in one area to what you do. There's we call that extrapolation in science. And those have been beneficial, in my opinion, in helping me to figure out where this is, because medical affairs didn't exist 22 years ago. But the vision to how to work and make those bridges long enough to build a connector between gaps is what led to that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
So your advice on finding mentors. Could you share about who have been important for you as mentors? So who were people that had a tremendous impact on you as a leader?
I wish it could be just, one person, but I have to admit it's a matrix. But I look at it as an inverted pyramid, Martin, if I may be so familiar. The capstone, if you turn the pyramid, the top of a pyramid is the capstone. But if we invert it, it starts with family and with my church religious experience. My pastor as a kid was very influential. Many of the deacons in my church, and I didn't know this at the time, were members of Alpha Phi Alpha and influencing me and encouraging me. And the teachers that I had, there were teachers who, I guess I was a little outspoken as a kid, maybe. I was tall, even though I'm average in the Dutch term. But I was tall.
I'm below average in the Netherlands.
It's okay. We're both falling kind of in the same perimeter there. But long story short, though, those who followed me in the educational path, really many of my foundational teachers, a few members of Alpha Kappa Alpha who were teachers of mine. I mentioned them when I was at their Boulay. Patrice Pruden and Shirley Talton are just 2 of several. But as I grew older, I did look to some iconic leaders. Of course, Dr. Martin Luther King, who turned out to be one of my fraternity brothers later, but his voice and his drive to bring people together was something that I really appreciated about him, in addition to many things he did. But I also remember Dr. Frederick Humphreys, who was a physical chemist, PhD, but the president of Florida A&M University. He went and he received his PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh and was the first African-American to obtain a PhD from Pitt in that field. But what I liked about him, well, first he was a little taller than both of us. He was 6'8", but an incredible leader, but took his ability in science and turned it around to be much more of an analytical tool and help him become a problem solver for things that were at that time academic. I saw several other leaders like that applying medical training, legal training. James R. Williams, who is the 25th general president of Alpha Phi Alpha, was one of my key mentors to become the general president of Alpha. He was a common pleas judge. He went to law school. He was the non-traditional student when he became an Alpha in 1958. He went back to school on the GI Bill, became a teacher, later became a councilman in Akron, Ohio. And eventually, when I moved to the area for school, I became the president of his alumni chapter. Many of the social graces I've learned, or at least I try to apply, I watched this icon within our fraternity, but really within the community. He was appointed by Jimmy Carter to be the district attorney for the Northern District of Ohio, not an assistant district attorney, the district attorney, one of the first African-Americans ever to hold that. He came from Columbus, Mississippi. And if he could do that, anyone could. But I'll close my leader experience though with my grandfather.
Mhm.
And this is my maternal grandfather, my mom's father. My father's parents died, they were much older, but died in when I was a very young child. But my mother's father came from what we call Jim Crow, Texas, where his father was a sharecropper. But my grandfather was so bright, although he didn't have an opportunity to go to school, he went into the army, but he founded or established 3 businesses that were very successful. If you were to meet him, he was so articulate and so well-spoken that you would thought he would have gone to college. He was a great public speaker. He was a great leader and turned out to be a leader in some fraternal circles, in the Odd Fellows, and he was the Grand Master of a couple of other organizations. But I saw him exhibiting this great leadership and poise, and it taught me that those organizations that he was a member of were about benevolence, giving back to the community.
Mhm.
And I think that's where watching him work, he was a deacon in the church, that was my inspiration. He gets, and I love my father. I mean, my dad was great, my mom, but I think back to him is probably right at the tip of the capstone.
Wonderful, thank you. So with the last example again, the giving back to the community, right? A key way in which you are currently doing so is as president of Alpha Phi Alpha, which is a volunteer organization.
That's correct.
So how do you do that? So how do you, as a volunteer organization, how does that work to be effective as a volunteer organization, to get people to commit, to work, to be effective?
It's challenging. For us, because we are a volunteer organization, we go through formalities that ensure that you're committed to what we believe in. Members make a formal petition to become a part of the organization. But it really is, in many respects, a spirit that has to be within inside the person to commit to doing something beyond what you do every day for a living and in your family. So I would say that one of the key drivers is to ensure that individuals, and this is why we often promote and talk about our organization, is so that folks will understand what we do. And I'm not new in thinking that. In 1914, our 5th general president, who later became Dr. Henry Lake Dickinson, who was the president of Bluefield State College. It was an historically Black university in West Virginia. But he was a collegian at the time when he was leading the organization. The organization was only, again, 8 years old when we think about still being new. So some collegiate aged people were still leading. But he made a very famous quote. He said, think Alpha Phi Alpha, talk Alpha Phi Alpha, promote Alpha Phi Alpha, and labor for the broad principles of idealism for which Alpha Phi Alpha was created, so that humanity should look on us as a body worthwhile. So our efforts to go out and touch the community through our programming, they are going to be changing from being national programs really to global programs or fraternity programs, as we recognize our footprint has grown beyond the continental United States. But our efforts to ensure that young people and people with promise are going to go to high school and to go to college, that we are also developing leaders. So we are mentoring and have what we call Project Alpha component, where we mentor young men in particular, and partner with other organizations who touch young girls and young ladies, so that we can help build an environment that is conducive with society. We also are very much about voter empowerment and voter education. Our program since 1930 has been Voteless People as a Hopeless People. Our educational program started in 1919. But we also are about our brothers and Brothers Keeper. we're trying to ensure that when you become an Alpha Phi Alpha man, your family is our family. So if a person passes away, we take care of their widow. We look out for their children and hopefully the brothers, the men will become members, but sometimes they don't. But we still build relationships with their families. We're concerned about them going. I know brothers who have died early, in our opinion, where chapters and brothers have contributed to the education of their children to ensure that they will make it, because it's about that level of commitment. When we say we develop brothers and we promote brotherhood, we really mean it.
Yep. And that brotherhood that creates commitments. that
Absolutely.
Allows you to run as a volunteer
Absolutely.
organization.
It
Yeah.
has to be, because they don't pay me to do my job. You know, I burn midnight oil to do this job often, but I mean, to be the chairman, I don't manage day-to-day operations. I'm the chairman of the board, so it helps out a little bit. So.
Terrific. We are about 2/3 of our way through our time here. So I would at this point like to open it up to a Q&A with everyone in the audience. Before I do so, I'd like to ask any Alpha Phi Alpha members in the audience to please stand to be recognized, along with any members of the South Bend chapter. And I may not say this right, Theta Psi Lambda, please.
Theta Psi Lambda.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you. Questions?
Don't be shy.
Questions?
You did say we were first of all.
That's
So
absolutely right. That's absolutely.
So President Lonzer, thank you for your wonderful just personification of the greatness of Alpha Phi Alpha. But I have a question about your undergraduate experience at Delaware State University and how essential historically Black colleges are for the production of African-American leaders and scientists and doctors. Can you talk about sort of the fraternities' historic relationship with historically Black colleges, as well as the importance of historically Black colleges for the production of African-American graduate students and professional students? Thank you.
Sure, that's a big delivery. I'll try to make it as succinct as I can. So of the Divine Nine, or the 9 historically Black fraternities and sororities, 6 of the 9 were established at historically Black colleges and universities. And let me just say that with the exception of Iota Phi Theta, which came in the 60s, what we formerly referred to as the Elite 8, I was initiated in 1986, so I've been around for 36 years come next month. The concept of leadership was really the draw with the fraternities and sororities. Those who were members often were leaders in their own right within the university campus. We eventually sprouted in 1911, an alumni chapter recognizing growth, but to bring it full circle, historically Black colleges and universities, much like many of the or ethnic or religious universities in history, were there to help develop culture. Jim Crow and and I'll call it segregation or racial prejudice often led to some challenges for institutions that would not recognize young people who had promise, who were African-American. So it saw the development, some post-1865, some a little prior, to the development of institutions that were for people who were of African-American or African descent. But within that university environment, much like I alluded to earlier, very akin to Notre Dame. We wanted to have an environment where you were culturally nurtured, that you were interested in the community, developing it, becoming a leader, growing. And the evolution or the advent of fraternities was natural. We as people are very much about connecting with, I'll try to keep it succinct and not too sociological, but bottom line, some of the greatest leaders in history in this country, not just within the African-American community, have come from historically Black colleges and universities. Many of us, how many folks in the audience know who Thurgood Marshall is? If you raise your hand. He was the first African-American to become a Supreme Court justice. He is an alumnus of Lincoln University, which is in Pennsylvania. He was a cut-up when he was in school and was kicked out of Lincoln University. He pledged our fraternity, though, in 1926, but like many of us, and so they just didn't make an Animal House for African Americans. We had our time too. But the point is that, long story short, he turned it around. Even though he was denied entrance into the University of Maryland School of Law, he went to Howard University's School of Law and became one of the greatest litigators, and eventually the Solicitor General of the United States, and eventually then to be seated as an Associate Supreme Court Justice, very much like Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson just became an Associate Justice. In that light, it took institutions that recognize great academic promise, but one of the greater traditions for some schools, not all, they had rolling admissions. So sometimes young people, and this is something I'm still discovering at 55, everyone didn't know where the resources were. And so there were young people who had promise, but really just had no academic performance. They took sometimes students, and I know of one who went to the famous East Side High School in New Jersey, who is a friend of mine, Mark, now Dr. Mark Bomani. Mark did not have the grades, didn't have the family home structure. But when he graduated from Delaware State University, he had a 3.8 GPA in mathematics, went on to get a master's in applied mathematics from Cleveland State University and a PhD in computer engineering from Case Western Reserve University. He is now a scientist at in Cleveland at the NASA Lewis station. He sent experiments to the space shuttle. Other institutions were like that too, though. And I'll say it was in principle, but that's how Cornell University started. Ezra Cornell saw that it was a place where people should be able to come, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their social culture, whatever, and find a way to find an education. So it's a very common thread that ties those things together. But the HBCUs have been the cultivator of those things. So many physicians, LaSalle Lafall was Dr. Lafall, and he was one of the reasons why I almost became a cardiothoracic surgeon. I didn't do it because of interest, but I had the skill set. But I studied under Dr. Lafall at Howard University in the School of Medicine. He had a photographic memory, so do I. And one of the things that I find about him, or found about him, that was amazing is his affability. He was so personable. He went to Florida A&M University. And while I just met with a colleague of mine, Ed Barksdale. Dr. Barksdale is a pediatric surgeon at Rainbow Babies and Children's Hospital in Cleveland. He went to Yale undergrad and Harvard Medical School. But what I have found is that those who've gone to these traditionally HBCUs, like the Howard School of Medicine, Meharry, have been able to compete and be very skilled at what they do, in addition to those who went to some very affluent institutions as well. So it's been a feeder, to your point. And individuals who come through there often are leaders that carry hats beyond what they do professionally. And that's a distinguisher quite often between the HBCU alumni and those who may go to other institutions. You're getting exposure to folks who are doing both, and you have a propensity to follow what you see. Does that help?
Question right here.
Sure. Why don't you tell me your name too? I'm gonna put some pressure on you. Stand up so I can see who
I
you
can do
are, see
that.
how tall you are. You
can
might
do
be
that.
Dutch, you never know.
Listen, I didn't get that gene from my dad, I'll tell you that. My name is Brent Lyle. I'm actually a duly initiated member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity as well from Ball State University in the fall of 2006. So I went to a predominantly white institution. And as a person of color going into an institution from my community, which was vastly African-American, impoverished, all of those typical indicators that you see from an environment of intense stress and lack. Got to a university where in many ways, I felt like I didn't know where to go. No rudder, no real direction. And in fact, in the context of the Divine Nine organizations, the only one that I knew about was Kappa Alpha Psi. My younger brother's godfather is a member of that organization. Now, when I got to Ball State University, that organization was not present. Alpha Phi Alpha was. So my question is not about Alpha Phi Alpha in particular, but it's about the effects of being involved in such an organization. After becoming a member, almost no matter where I go, simply because I am a member with that commonality, there's an open arm welcoming me to participate in the activities and delights of whatever that community is, right? And we can speak ad infinitum about the positive aspects of being in this fraternity and any other. But for you, Dr. Lonzer, what are some of the things that you notice about the fraternity that we don't do so well and that you want to embark on your mission to try to make sure that we start to fulfill some of those obligations from our creed, from the protocol manual, from what you would expect as a leader in business and in nonprofit? And how do you see those changes you want to implement kind of going into manifesting a better next 100 years of our organization?
I could swear you were a plant. One thing I didn't do is update my resume very recently. The presidents of those 9 organizations form what we call the Council of Presidents. Last week in DC at the Congressional Black Caucus, I was elected the vice chairman of the Council of Presidents. So that will mean in another year, I will succeed and become the chairman and lead I'll call it, facilitate the discussion amongst the presidents of the organizations. But one thing I have been saying, and for the first time in the 100+ year existence of the fraternities, now I think Phi Beta Sigma is 108 years of age. It's our youngest of the traditional 4. Iota Phi Theta was founded in 1963, but we held the first joint legislative day on Capitol Hill in June of this year. I was a part of the 5 presidents agreeing that we would go to Washington, D.C. to make a concerted effort for African-American young men, but for all people. We're not just trying to reach the Black community or the brown community, but all people. We have members who are diverse. We have members who come from Richmond, Virginia, like me, who are from the South, but grew up in the city, or maybe very rural exposure, or they come from a huge city like Chicago. I married a Chicagoan, so I took on some of that swag. I have to do that to live in my household. But long story short, we recognized, to your point, that we need to be more cohesive. We can't do what the members of Alpha Kappa Alpha, and there may be Delta Sigma Theta members in the room as well, of course, and Zeta Phi Beta and Sigma Gamma Rho. The ladies are by genetics more communal and more interacting. Men, we are thugs. We stand off and want to group up and oppose each other, per se. We can be thuggish. I'm not picking on the thuggies in the world, and that actually, well, that's another conversation, or maybe over dinner. But amazingly how the terms we use have come from other countries. That comes not from the United States, that comes from India. But nonetheless, what we don't do well is learn how to work together. All 5 of the fraternities have very similar missions. And I recently said at Alpha Street Baptist Church on this past Sunday. And I said it there in June, that we squandered great opportunities in our first 100 years of growth on how to work more together and how to find common goals that although we wear different colors and we have different symbols and secrets, our missions are the same. In this next 100 years, let's make sure that we are more dovetailing, more congruent, more fraternal amongst each other. And we've started to see that manifest itself when we're going to Capitol Hill to advocate for not only African-American issues, but one of the things we're going to advocate for next year is newborn screening. Newborn screening impacts everyone in this room. Black, white, brown, red, green. If you like Captain Kirk, you know green is important. That was a joke. I'm telling my age because no one knows who Captain Kirk is anymore. That's so sad. Star Trek, but the traditional Star Trek with Leonard Nimoy. But long story short, we have to be advocates for our communities, and that community stretches broad, but doing it together, finding ways to partner. We're going to partner with Omega Psi Phi. The Grand Basileus, who went out of office, but Ricky Lewis, Grand Basileus Lewis, texted me while I was on my way here today, and working together, knowing that it's about us standing shoulder to shoulder, because we'll go, if you want to go someplace fast, go alone. But if you want to go and get there, go together. Go together.
Question.
It makes me slower. Yes.
Question here.
Oh, I know who this guy is.
Brother Lonzer,
How are
Brother
you?
Marvin Logan. How are you, brother?
I'm great to see you, Martin. It's
Yeah.
always good to see you.
Always good to see you. I think my question is actually a good piggyback off of the last. So our organizations in our nature, we tend to be, at least publicly, humble and rather private and reserved about the activities of our organizations and the different things that we do. I myself was introduced to Alpha Phi Alpha through school days in a different world. Recently, we've embarked on some new journeys, a few of which being one, first this partnership being the first of its kind, and then also our inclusion in the show Bel Air. And we've started to take more of a public approach. Why is that, and why is it essential for the development of our organizations in the next 100 years?
Well, I'm glad you asked the question. And it goes back to what I had shared with the dean around Dr. Henry Lake Dickinson's famous quote. We called it, when I pledged, Dickinson's quotation, because we have to promote the level of service and fraternity that we are. We are different than the Teeks, and it's nothing against Kappa Alpha or the Teeks or the Kappa Sigs or anything, not at all. Every organization has its purpose, but we go beyond collegiate membership. In fact, folks who may not have, like maybe if they went to Notre Dame, they wouldn't have a chance to pledge a fraternity. They could pledge through the alumni chapter later, because again, our service is for a lifetime, not for just during college. But we do some significant things that I didn't mention. Alpha Phi Alpha was the principal originator and driver of the Martin Luther King Memorial that's in Washington, D.C. right now. We raised $6 million. And we saw it as earnest money to the global community to say that we're serious about this. And we were able, through the leadership of many of my predecessors as general president, but really the key goes to Harry Johnson, Esquire, Attorney Johnson, who now is the chairman of the Memorial Foundation, was the principal driver. He raised $120 million because we recognize, while we love Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a fraternity, he really was a global leader and an inspiration to many people outside of the global United States. And despite those who may have different philosophical or I'll call them sociological perspectives, I'm trying to be very respectful academically here today, he was indeed a great leader among other leaders in this nation. But the reality of seeing the only non-president on the Mall of the United States for our fraternity brother, yes, it's a win for us, but it really was a win for all fraternities, for all of the 5 fraternities, but for the Divine Nine. But we say it was a win for every collegian and every person in this nation because of what he espoused and what he taught. Was he perfect? No person is. But the principles that he taught around nonviolence and that people should have an opportunity to have a good life. Sounds like the Declaration of Independence to me. When we talk about the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, come on. I mean, those are very American principles.
I still go teach a class every semester, and my very first class, I assigned Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail to
Yes.
students to read.
Yes, very much so.
We have time for one last question.
I hope I answered your question.
Okay.
Okay.
One last, do we need 2 last questions?
We need 2 last, I think. We
Okay,
do.
let's keep our questions brief.
Oh, these are dissertations, man. We could write things on it.
Brother President Lonzer, this is a Mendoza initiative. And I know you alluded to it a little bit, but in Alpha Phi Alpha are some of the major leaders in business in this country. And we've built homes, and we've started major corporations. I remember a graduation ceremony when a Alpha Phi Alpha member paid off all the college.
Robert Smith.
Thank you.
Robert.
And I think if you would talk about some of those business leaders and why it is important for an institution like Notre Dame to engage some of the brothers of Alpha Phi Alpha, and why it's important that prior to Brother Martin coming to this university and then opening up a door, they had a lot of African graduates, but no domestic African-American graduates in the graduate school. And how important for Alpha Phi Alpha to get behind this program at Notre Dame and other institutions, even though Notre Dame is a Catholic university, and it may have some issues with dealing with Greek organizations. The fact that it is said that our dorms take care of the social needs of our students. There is a need to deal with the support of these young men when they're in the graduate school. And how can Alpha become even a more strategic partner in spreading the word around the country? This is not the only institution that can use men of Alpha Phi Alpha or women of the other Divine Nine. But how can we really get behind this and make a difference? Because this institution can generate a number of businesses with the Idea Center. They raise money. There's an Alpha over at the Idea Center. They raised over $2 million for a medical product. My son is making electric guitars over there. They're raising funds for him. I think this is a wonderful opportunity. How can Alpha step up and really get behind this program?
Well, I think the point goes to my brother in his prior question. It's about us sharing who are members of the organization and what they do. I think probably a most recent recognition, and certainly notoriety is not a positive word. Recognition is Robert Smith of Vista Capital, Cornell University alumnus, and he is an Alpha Phi Alpha member, pledged a couple of years before I did. And this billionaire philanthropist did pay off all of the tuition for Morehouse college graduates very recently to the order of $40 million. But we also have had historically others. Another example is the former CEO of McDonald's, Don Thompson. He pledged at Purdue University here in Indiana. So he's a Hoosier, not of IU Hoosier fame, but of state fame. But we've seen his efforts as well as Bob, I think his last name is Williams. He's an engineer, inventor, but he was the person who invented the radar that tracks all planes that fly, is an Alpha man. That's just 3 examples, and he sold his business wisely and made quite a nice money pot there. I think that was a good idea to do, but And we have others who are leaders in some in the oil industry. I think about Jesse Williams down in Texas, who's with Exxon. We have folks who are in the president of Hyundai North America is an Alpha Phi Alpha man. We have others who are serving in various aspects of business, as well as within the pharma arena, within medicine, the president of a number of surgical societies and the like. But the point I raised about going outside of the scope of just a true business perspective, we have others in engineering, is the diversity of the playing field within the fraternity. But I would say this, and I'm going to be very selfless to say that the other fraternities also have men who have been distinguishing themselves as well. This is not so, greatness and exclusivity, although every alpha man would tell you we're the greatest fraternity in the universe. There are other of the traditional African-American fraternities that are producing outstanding men. I mean, Kappa Alpha Psi was mentioned earlier. Reginald Lewis was the first billionaire with Beatrice Foods. That's right. So, I mean, we all have some incredible experiences and things that we can talk about where we have touched on every echelon of society, from governmental leadership, business leadership, medical science leadership, you name it. So we have a robust purpose. And if we can't sit on the campus by membership, we can at least partner and make sure that people advance themselves to try to be better and make our nation better and our world better.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your support. And
One
again,
more
we're
One last question.
all right,
And we're
Martha,
wrapping up.
Be awesome, please.
Yeah, I'll represent for the ladies, and I'm also representing for the women of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, the best sorority in the world. Hello, Dr. Lonzer. My name is Deja Moore. I work here at Notre Dame in the development department. I'm also someone that is a part of the Mendoza. Yes. Hi, how you doing? I'm a part of the Executive Master's Program of Nonprofit Administration. And the question that I have for you is, as a national leader for a nonprofit organization, what are the top 3 to 5 values that you believe a nonprofit leader should have? With me working in nonprofit organizations for the past 5 years, since I graduated in 2018 from Indiana State University, now getting my executive master's in nonprofit administration, I too am looking to become an executive leader in the nonprofit sector. So what advice do you have for those that are looking to progress in this field?
Thank you for the question. And I certainly recognize the 9 white pearls that you bear. We learn to be very diplomatic, gentlemen. You got to learn, you got to learn, you got to learn. Number one, I think in terms of values is a commitment to the community where you are placed. We have only been in one other location. Our headquarters was in Chicago. We are now seated in Baltimore. So we recognize our place there and that we should be very much connected to the community. One other value that I think is important is a diverse working environment. We have members and non-members, males and females, who work currently in our headquarters environment and part of our operations. That ensures that we are touching homes and families and values. We're helping to galvanize, at least locally, but also in some of the partnerships that we do have, the significance of remaining grounded in the communities that we serve. And I see them as definitely connected, but very much different. The moral compass nails us because we have to stay committed to where we are. But our ability to make sure that we're touching families and that we're helping to give leadership opportunities and development opportunities, not only to our entire staff, is very critical. How we see growth and giving opportunities for individuals to further their education. We're doing those things, and I think it makes a difference. And the last one, I would say of three, and this is a commitment to ethics. I really, it's interesting that I'm the first, let me make sure I say this correctly, because one of my predecessors was in business, but small business. But I believe that from especially from big pharma, but from global corporate experience, I'm the first general president to ever come from that environment, and then to be a scientist and an immunologist in a pandemic. We held our first hybrid convention in the history of the fraternity here in Indianapolis last year. Zero transmission of the virus. 1,500 plus people present and globally connected, probably about 3,500 in terms of the total scope of the convention. For in the middle of a pandemic and really just getting the boosters on board, it was a big lift. But we were committed to ethics to ensure that everyone would have a safe environment. It would be done well. It would be done efficiently, financially so, and within the scope of what the organization needed to do. I've seen a departure sometimes in certain arenas from ethics. And it's not just about making money, or it's not just about advancing what you want to, but making sure that the individuals that are in the organization and those that you partner with and serve are mutually lifted as well. I think those three, for me, drive what I do every day to make sure that we do it well, that we remember those whom we touch, and that we're committed to be a beacon of light in Baltimore, Maryland, where sometimes individuals never get a chance to see anything brighter than the sun that comes up.
Great. Thank you. Then, my final task for me is to thank you again for coming. We're so honored by our partnership and by your presence here
My
today.
pleasure.
Thank all of you for coming. And we have a small present for you to show our appreciation.
Thank you. I'll stand for that.
In colors of the university.
Well, I tried to wear the colors of the university today to not be so
Thank you.
predictable with black and old gold. So thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you.